Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much from the team in Silvera. So I'm Diego Jusiniano. I'm the CEO of Exomad Green. We're the largest BCR project in the world right now. We have been operating since March of last year. We certified by July under Puro methodology, and we have successfully delivered over 68,000 tons of removals since then. So we're here and we're open to any questions, and basically that's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Annalise, thank you, and the Silvera team for having us today. Cindy Kwan, I co-lead the Sustainable Banking Group at Barclays. I've got two of my colleagues here, Caitlin and Emily, in the back, so any hard questions, you can divert their direction. Our team, as the name suggests, help all of our corporate clients as well as institutional clients across their sustainability skills. And so ultimately what we do is we develop solutions, we develop products, we advise, we help raise capital for these companies. And so we've been spending a lot of time specifically in CDRs and NBS solutions this year, realizing the gaps that there are in the market and the true financing solutions that need to come to market in order to be able to help it scale, whether afforestation type of projects, whether they are CDR type of projects, bringing together the appropriate parties within the market from the demand side to the supply side to third-party capital. Traditionally lie in this space are talked about and ultimately have a mitigant associated with those risks in order to truly be able to scale and bring efficiency to this market.
Hi everyone, I'm Masao from Mitsubishi Corporation. Mitsubishi is one of the largest Japanese conglomerate company. So we do the investment in multiple industries. We do investment in a mining asset, we do investment in consumable goods, agriculture, blah, blah, blah. So we do the same thing in carbon market or CDR markets. So we have two teams. One is a nature-based solution team, making investment in reforestation, afforestation, and the other team is investment in tech-based solutions. I'm head of carbon dioxide removal, and I'm doing investment in tech CDR projects such as direct capture or BEX project, or biochar, and also enhanced rock weathering. And also, we need a demand to make a big investment. So we're also doing a demand creation activities, which is called Next CDR Facility. That is a capitalistic platform to matching the demand and supply to scale this market. It's very nice to see.
Masao, why don't we stay with you? Japan has a uniquely strong sort of regulatory signal, a signal from the government about the role of CDR and the carbon markets for corporations. When you think about your portfolio strategy, how has the policy sort of signal helped you build the portfolio? How have you thought about deciding which projects or project types and pathways to invest in?
Thank you so much. So I started this activity or CDR activities 5 years ago. And I had lots of meetings with Japanese companies. Why don't you start purchasing a CDR like, Microsoft, Amazon? But all one says, Mitsubishi is too advanced. Ironically said, why do we need to pay $100, $200 per ton? But at the same time, I told them, why you committed to net zero? I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you also said, why do we need to commit net zero right now? So I think they should move. And finally, as I mentioned, this year, Japanese government launched the ETS, Japanese ETS, the first ETS. And I'm in the committee of the Japanese government for the ETS, and we discussed in the committee, what kind of carbon credit will be eligible for the ETS. And finally, we approved tech CDR credit. I think Japanese ETS, the first ETS all over the world to certified, approved tech CDR credit as eligible under the ETS. That is a very good demand signal to the market. So then I came back to all the companies I discussed 5 years ago. They changed their mind, came to me. We have a lots of discussion with the Japanese corporate to start purchasing the tech CDR. So we like to catalyze the market such a way. And again, we cannot make a big investment without such a demand.
So we talked about the portfolio strategy, thinking about all the kind of pathways and the levers that we have to pull. Now let's focus on the project-specific diligence. You've made investments and sort of procured from many different projects. Can you talk us through what that process has been like?
Sure. So, within as you may know, within tech city project, lots types of the technologies, biochar, enhanced rock weathering, DAG specs. And enhanced rock weathering or biochar is related to agriculture business. DAG specs need a CCS, which is related to oil and gas industries. And also BECS needs like biomass related. So I think potentially Mitsubishi is only one company who can do such a business within one company. We have agri business, we have oil and gas business, we have biomass business. So we are developing our own portfolio through the existing business relationship with Shell, Exxon, and also agri companies, and also biomass companies. And to develop a portfolio, of course, we need to do the due diligence of the quality of the carbon credit, and supported by the Silvera, so it's very good. And also, the current most of the current commitment or offtake is an advanced commitment. So the most important thing is that the credit will be actually issued, delivered to the buyers. So we at Mitsubishi is one of the largest infrastructure or big investment company. We always do the due diligence, the bankability of the project, and also execution capabilities of the team and also project. And also we know each industries. So for example, if biochar is used for the agriculture business, we also need to think about farmers, agri companies think about if the biochar affects on a negative impact on the productions, they cannot generate carbon credit. So we have the industrial knowledge for any multiple industries. That is also another our capability to develop the portfolio.
Yeah, there's a lot to know between project types. Diego, let's move to you. You've been through several of long due diligence processes. What is it like on the other side as the supplier?
So it's very long. But yes, I think it's fair because it's something very important that the actual buyer feels confident with the supplier perspective, how they're doing the project, how everything is put together, and like Masao was saying, feel confident through the whole chain, not only with the production, but always thinking about where is the product going. In our case, it's biochar, so we are 100% applying free biochar to the local communities, indigenous communities in Bolivia, to better the yields in production, to improve farming over there, and therefore, a series of co-benefits. So I think it's completely important to go through that process. So basically, and answering straight the question, I think it's a very long process, but it's a fair process that we have to go through. Mitsubishi, in this case, it's involved with a buyer group, which is next gen. So I think that makes it a little bit easier because it's a bit more standardized. But other than that, from our side, we're prepared. We're a company that has a standard procedure, so it's okay. I think it's a little bit tougher for new upcoming companies to go through this process, but it's something that, once you start, once you go through that process one time and the second time and the third time, then you get used to it and you have to have your whole documentation in order, and from there on, it's okay. It's okay, tough, but it's okay.
Cindy, in the panel yesterday, one of the discussions was about, you have investments in, let's say, land, and these are for commodities, but you also have the ability to sort of diversify revenue streams for carbon projects, and this fund in particular was keeping them distinct. And Exomad has made the choice to not sell biochar, to use only carbon credit revenues as part of that revenue stream. Can you talk maybe a bit about that decision? Was it something that was evident, thinking about additionality? Is it something that sort of matured in conversation with buyers?
I think it's something that matured over the time. So initially, when we were doing the feasibility of the project, we thought about different things, biochar for environmental remediation, biochar for agricultural uses, biochar for many things. But then again, we have our main company, our core company, it's a wood-based company in the sustainable wood sector. So we had, let's say, free access to a lot of biomass available in our sector. So that being said, we had a strategic advantage that there was a zero cost to our biomass. So therefore, we were able to have a low-cost product on the biochar. And it became available actually only with the additionality of the carbon credit to be able to spread it or give it away for free to the local communities that needed it. So that being said, it was a working process that at the end of the day, the business model ended up going towards this direction. I think that there's if you wanna do something important in this business, you have to think about the scale, and to develop a business in biochar that you're dependent on selling the biochar, you're not able to scale very fast because biochar is a new product on the market. So that being said, in our model, we thought about a different option, which was with our biomass available for free, then basically we can take advantage of that and spread it to the local communities for free. So that being said, yeah.
Annalise, if I can actually just tap onto that, given that we've been hearing a lot this week around the voluntary carbon markets and this whole concept around financial additionality, it's really interesting to actually hear, without standardization on the buyer side with regards to how high in terms of the criteria they actually put financial additionality. And it's actually at both ends of the spectrum, depending on who you speak to. Some of the larger purchasers of carbon will say, absolutely, financial additionality is one of the top 3 priorities. They would not invest in and also purchase carbon from projects that have other revenue streams because they have the other revenue streams ultimately to sustain the viability of that project and that company. And then you have others that say that they would absolutely not invest and purchase offsets from projects that have no additional revenue stream, because if you're going to plant a tree, let's say, why wouldn't you plant a fruit-bearing tree or a tree that actually produces a commodity? So not only are you sequestering carbon because that tree is not going to get cut down, but there's another revenue stream that you ultimately can help sustain from a broader ecosystem services perspective, other local communities that could actually benefit from the planting of that tree that produces a commodity that could ultimately be sold. And so you've got this kind of like dichotomy of buyers out there, which has made it, I would say, difficult in order to be able to come to a conclusion around, well, what is right at the end of the day? Should you support a project that has another stream? Should investors support projects that have other financial streams? I mean, from an investor's perspective, what we've heard is other financial revenue streams help them get comfort with the fact that should the voluntary carbon markets go away, you go back to a commoditized market, which is tried and true, versus other investors who really want to push the boundary and say that they will be willing to take on the risk of knowing that this market, knowing that the demand in this market will continue to scale and the environmental attribute is going to be significantly more valued in 5 years' time as we get closer towards the 2030 commitments of these corporates versus in 20 years' time where it's going to be surpassingly more valuable because the cost of carbon is going to continue to increase as the world gets towards 2050.
And this is one of the reasons why you have to do project level diligence, right? These revenues have to be contextualized. If it is something that is bringing in a revenue stream for the communities that is going to contribute to permanence and the long-term sort of a value on this ecosystem, that's one question. And then the sort of subsequent question is, okay, well, where is this revenue stream going? Is it going directly back to the community or is it going somewhere else? So thinking about revenues not only as is it financially additional or is it not, but really in the context of the project and where those revenues go.
Right, which I don't think that there has been any kind of standardized agreement amongst the industry, and probably also for the better, right? Like, because as you start to think about the project beyond just the project, so if you're building more of an infrastructure engineered type of project, you have to think about the other ecosystems in which that project actually touches. Like, how do you get to the project? Are there roads? Is there infrastructure? Do you have local workforce? Right? When you think about it from that perspective, it is broader than just the actual carbon sequestration that is happening at that project. So on one side, the buyers who are saying, well, you need to support more broader ecosystems to ensure, given that we are a global economy, that all of that works. Makes sense. But then you also have the other side to say, like, from a financial viability perspective, you really want to double down and support a market that did not exist 2 decades ago. And how do you do that? You put all of the emphasis around the actual carbon sequestration, and you kind of take a forward bet in a way that the carbon sequestration component is going to be so valuable in and by itself that this market needs to scale.
And so if every project is a snowflake and every deal looks a little different, what do we need for the market to scale if you're thinking about this from a structuring or finance perspective?
A lot of different components. I don't think I know what the secret sauce is personally, just given all of the diligence that my team and I have done out in the market. But at the end of the day, it comes to risk and risk allocation. So you can think about risk very broadly, right? There's payment risk, and payment risk, I think the buyers in the voluntary space have done a great job in mitigating payment risk, right? You have a credit-worthy counterparty who is committed, willing, will be there as your partner, that as you, as a developer, like Diego, that you can rely on the fact that there is going to be a future revenue stream coming from a player that will be there for the long term, right? Like, so there's payment risk. Then the topic du jour has always been around development risk, right? There's different types of development risk, whether it's a nature-based project, whether it's an engineered project. The engineered projects follow more of the traditional infrastructure, like solar, wind, a very mature business that has come and grown significantly over the last 2 decades. CDR and new engineered solutions are just at the brinks of starting that journey. So I compare it to where solar and wind were in terms of the cost, levelized cost of energy. Very, very high in the beginning. Really not understood as to how do you scale that market. And all of a sudden you had the corporate buyers saying that, hey, we are willing to sign long-term virtual power purchase agreements, which probably in the early 80s, 1990s, that term didn't exist. But look at where we are right now in terms of the terawatts of power, of clean power that are generated. This is where CDR needs to come and get to and go. But the development risk of a lot of these first-of-a-kind technologies needs to get over that first hump around who is your engineering partner, who is your design partner, who is your manufacturing partner, who knows how to build large-scale electrolyzers, who knows how to build large-scale electrolyzers that take on new feedstock, right? Because electrolysis by itself is not a new product, but ultimately we're starting to use a lot of existing products in different ways with new feedstock, new inputs, and new outputs as well, where we've created a market that did not exist decades ago. And so there is tech risk involved in that. And so how do we get over that hump of the first of a kind? How do we do pilots at scale? And then how do we very quickly move from pilot development to commercialization? Who needs to be there as part of the process? And I think a lot of this hinges on financial innovation. However, that financial innovation can't come if you don't have the appropriate parties at the table to talk about the risks. And some of these risks are unknown, which is why a lot of these, financing vehicles are ultimately first of a kind. But it's talking through the development risk, because I heard a great quote from an investor last week who said, the gap right now is not for the mere fact that there isn't enough capital in this space. There is a lot of capital. There is a lot of dry powder. However, we need the developers to actually build really great projects that understand development and understand industry and understand manufacturing, because the concept around sequestering carbon is a concept until it actually becomes reality. And where the investors are ultimately seeing the gap is that gap to, like, these are infrastructure projects. They are real estate projects at the end of the day. They have to be sited somewhere. There needs to be land. There needs to be a lease. There needs to be a purchase of land. And then ultimately you get into permitting, et cetera, as part of that development process. Who knows that process well enough at these project level developers to actually see a project through? Because now you have to hire an EPC contractor, and that EPC contractor has all of these subs that are coming from all these different locations, but from projects that may not be specifically a DAC project, an enhanced weathering project, a biochar project, et cetera. And so there's a lot that still needs to happen from a project level perspective to get over that hurdle to where investors feel comfortable. And then you get to the buyers, right? The buyers need to be there at the end of the day. So it's like, it's a very delicate dance of a lot of parties at the table. But it's kind of like the next gen technology, and how do we get over that first couple of years hump around the tech risk?
One of the things that we've talked about in the past is getting investors comfortable with the different thresholds and the kind of carbon market specific language. So what have you seen as a useful tool or mechanism for getting comfortable with those thresholds on quality?
That's a very good question around quality. I think there still needs to be a bit of education. What we've seen and heard from developers directly is that carbon is still not a thing that they fully understand, and they need to hear it directly from the buyers as to the thresholds that the buyers are going to set. Because when you still talk to the buyers, the quality and the check marks around quality still differ. And so, once again, it's a very delicate kind of matchmaking business, because one investor may say, well, this is quality that we would invest in, but then they have a buyer and a counterparty on the other side that says, well, no, this is our threshold for quality. And so there's still not kind of like this levelized agreement in the industry around quality. I think you can prove it in terms of durability, permanence, additionality, et cetera, but all of those quality characteristics, by every corporate and by every company, the priority list changes, right? So not every company is going to say, okay, well, additionality is the top priority. Some go by durability is the top quality. And because you still have that variability across the spectrum, I think, once again, one of the reasons, I'm not going to say it's the only reason, but I think one of the reasons ultimately this hasn't taken off as quickly as possible is because of that variability in aligning and finding the right financing partner. You need to ensure that those priorities are aligned. And everyone's going to be a little bit different in the beginning until the industry finally like normalizes, okay, top one priority for any buyer in the space should be X, top two should be this, and top three should be this. I think it's still going to take a little bit of time to mature.
Yeah, I mean, the importance and the role of advanced market commitments or groups of buyers like NextGen or Symbiosis or Frontier is a way to kind of channel in and align on what those thresholds are. So maybe, Masao, what has that process been like? How have you found the sort of alignment on what quality means in Mitsubishi and NextGen?
So when we started NextGen a few years ago, so we set criteria. We had a discussion with the multiple buyers. So what kind of technology, what kind of quality they like to purchase. But the situation slightly, it's not mature market, premature. So lots of new technology come in, and lots of discussion, and lots of buyers come in. So we keep discussing with buyers quarterly or monthly or quarterly, yearly, and we see the market. For example, potentially, I think when we started the NextGen a few years ago, lots of people like we should purchase a 1,000 plus permanence project. But recently, DOE started the pilot project, and they set up 100 years plus, and also European Commission developing the European carbon removal certificate. They said for like a few century permanence as a long duration. So we need to keep updated, and we need to keep discussing with the stakeholders. As Cindy mentioned, there's no clear threshold. So we discuss each other, and and also discuss the market stakeholders. Then we set updating.
Excellent. I guess let's take a round for all of the panelists to think about what is going to be the thing that moves the needle for next year? What can we be looking forward to, and how do we build on the momentum of climate we can carry it into the future for scale? Diego, let's start with you.
Well, I think that in general, there's a mix of factors that need to happen for us to be able to scale. One of them very important is the financing. Another one very important, of course, is the buyers. But then there is, in terms of the supplier, what's first, the chicken or the egg, because you're looking for finance to build a factory, to build capacity, to be able to scale, to offer what's needed, because we all know what's needed for 2030 and to get to net zero. But then, financing is or investors are not comfortable with, first you should get a long-term contract and then come to me, but the buyer is not willing to put a long-term contract if you don't have, a facility up and running. So that's a very tough thing to break through, and I think that's for us in the supplier's perspective one of the most important parts that need a breakthrough in our sector, so we can be able to actually see how we can actually scale significantly up and move forward to our next year. So that being said, we luckily had a company behind us, which is our core company, that supported and we were able to do the first factory, the pilot factory, and with that be able to get the contracts and so on and so forth. But that's not the case for everyone. So I really think that there's a major milestone there to be achieved. And once we get through that barrier, then we're going to be able to scale up.
I would say I completely agree with Diego. I do think it's a little bit chicken or egg, but if I were to place one chip just somewhere, I think it starts with the demand side. The demand signal has to be there, because without the demand signal, one, we wouldn't have such a spur of all of the climate technologies that are racing to try to meet that demand. But that demand signal needs to be longer. So it can't just be like one time hit the market, where traditionally in the past it was always kind of like the spot purchases. It needs to be much longer term commitments. The volumes need to be much longer, much larger. And the demand signal needs to truly scale in this. And it's also very difficult because demand, specifically on the engineered side, is still a bit price sensitive, but I think we're starting to get over that hump and realizing why the price curve is the way that it is. But Frontier has done an excellent job in trying to mobilize that demand signal in the market. And I would think, in one of the initial questions that you had asked is like, what is the big needle mover in this space? I think this year we've seen a tremendous amount of kind of spin-offs off of Frontier, right? Like Frontier was the first mover in this space. Now I think we've seen the demand signals directly from the corporates by themselves to start to sign these much longer dated, much larger volume contracts.
I also think that there's a chicken and egg situation from slightly different angle. So when we discuss with the buyers, why do we need to pay such a high, especially for the DAX or BEX? And on the other hand, on the supply side, they do that R&D funded by the VC, and they are ready to go for the market. But a first of a kind project, the cost is must be high, and they cannot start to develop facility with the buyers, and also they cannot reduce cost. So, to break this chicken and egg situation, maybe as Cindy mentioned, we refer to renewable energy industries. So feed-in tariff came in, and the cost of the renewables decreased from the buyer's perspective. Then lots of demand came in, and lots of supply came in, and the competition happened, and finally the cost dramatically dropped. So we should have such a way. But on the other hand, right now, I think government needs to support multiple technologies, not only for the CDR, but also SAF, hydrogen, ammonia, blah, blah, blah. So the budget is limited. So I think right now we should collaborate between the private sectors and also public sectors. In addition to the government support, so we private sectors also jumping like a frontier does and collaboratively support the technology effectively, and we need to scale the demand and also scale the project.